So we are live. I'm with Kieran, Lisney. Kieran, say hello.
Hello, hello,
How's it
hello.
going? What have you been up to? What do you
It's
want to talk about today?
oh, dude. There's been a ton going on, but I don't know. We haven't had a conversation broadcasted before live. I thought it would be kind of interesting to do. Watching my boy Matt go on a couple times, and some of the previous guests that you did, like scheduled, edited interviews with, was kind of cool to see it in like a live context. So I thought it would be pretty cool. Plus, there has been a lot going on as far as my transition into Orthodoxy and leaving Protestantism, and also a growing interest. I guess you could call it a growing interest in young Earth creationism, because you and I never really discussed that before. And since he came out as YEC, um, I mean, I've pretty much always held that position. I never bought into evolutionary theory, or people like to differentiate between Darwinian evolutionary theory, and it's all the same to me. And the what's his name, Nicholas Krisick? Is that his
Yeah,
name?
yeah.
Yeah. That dude and I share a lot of the same beliefs, so we connected slightly through the comments on your channel, and yeah, I don't know. That's an
Okay.
interesting topic as well. But
Yeah. So do you believe in the firmament and geocentrism then?
so I'm hazy on that stuff. However, what I do find interesting is the Van Allen radiation belt.
Okay.
Um, if that would potentially be some sort of like archetype of the firmament, or whatever you want to call it, whatever scripture calls it, because supposedly we don't have the technology now to go back to the moon, which is why we haven't gone back to the moon since like 73 or whatever it is. Supposedly, like, NASA's been documented saying a video, saying essentially that we just don't have the technology to do it anymore. Yet we pour billions upon billions of dollars into the NASA space program every single year, but we don't know where it goes, right? So the question is essentially, where does that money go? Is it simply being pushed into a propaganda machine to make us think that they're doing a whole bunch of research in the ISS and all this stuff? Like, it doesn't add up. So we know, like, given supposedly there's no way that we can traverse the Van Allen radiation belt, because it would just destroy every single ship that we have. And if that's true, then you look at like the lunar module, the one that landed on the moon, and it's like essentially just tinfoil, and like almost looks like PVC and tinfoil put together. Somehow that got through the Van Allen radiation belt, but now we can't surpass it for some reason, which to me doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So I question it.
Hmm.
Like I said before, the details of it I'm hazy with, but I'm typically skeptical of anything that they say. Oh, we found this black hole in space, or we found this, that, or the other. It's like, yeah, we don't know, 97% of what's in our oceans, but we know more about space, which is infinite, seemingly infinite. It's not really, but you get what I'm saying.
It's
Like, it's
big.
just, yeah, it's real big. So I don't know. It's
Al-
interesting.
Allegedly, it's big, but
Yeah.
um, I used to work at the Canadian Space Agency here in Quebec, Canada, and I was working on a small part of the Odin project, which was an international, uh, just a small part of an international space station program, and everything was codenamed with the Norse gods,
Hmm.
Odin, Osiris, and it's interesting. I mean, my little piece of the puzzle was so small. I was just basically calibrating and testing one tiny piece of equipment
Right.
that was going to be part of this. But it's hard. It's hard to know what ultimate reality is, especially if you approach it from a naive, uh, secular point of view. If you have religion, if you have God and religion, then these questions fade into
Right.
insignificance. As Saint Augustine famously said, we don't need to know about the stars in order to go to heaven. And but it is, I do agree that the truth is important. Every single aspect of the truth is important, including the spatial coordinates and orientation of every single particle in the universe. It is important.
Right.
And but in terms of conspiracy theories and all that sort of thing, it's fun, but I think a lot of most of it
It's
is,
peripheral.
I think it's demonic actually. Most of it is just distraction.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think that it is super easy to get hung up on, you know, what's the Luciferian plan going on behind X, Y, and Z. And really, it is, I mean, speaking from experience, it is a distraction from what's actually important, which is your relationship with Christ, and following his statutes and his commandments. The one thing that I will say, though, a lot of people speculate as to like, why would you even lie about something like that? Like, why would you
Yeah.
lie that space is, you know, just as gigantic as they tell us is, that it is? And essentially what I've come to the conclusion of is that it's essentially just to make us feel like we're insignificant, and
Hmm.
that if there is a God, he's so far removed from us that it's impossible to communicate with him, it's impossible to have a relationship with him. So a lot of it has to revolve around essentially dismantling this idea of a personal God. And I mean, essentially that's all you have to know, you know. And but beyond that, getting into the details, it does just become a distraction at a certain point. So
Hmm. Yeah, salvation history, what it's all about. What is your particular role in salvation history, and what's
mhm.
your one-on-one relationship with God and with the God-man Jesus Christ in particular? Since we are man, and God took on flesh and became man in all things but sin, it becomes very central to the Christian's life to have that personal relationship with the God-man Jesus Christ. And when it comes to judgment, your particular judgment, you're going to be alone with God, and you can't blame Hitler or NASA or any of the bad guys. We won't be able to blame anyone. We're going to have to deal with the choices we made, and the evil that we did willingly and knowingly. So yeah, that's
Yeah,
why I don't get too excited about conspiracy theories, and I'm a bit wary of them. But I do admit that it's fun
yeah,
to think about it. It's
yeah,
a sort of a comfortable place you can sink into on your couch and say, okay, we understand the big picture. They're good guys, bad guys, and I'm on the good guys team, and let's round up the bad guys. But it's a little bit more complex than that, because Christ died for the bad guys too, right?
yeah. Absolutely, absolutely.
What about hell? Did you have any reaction to Chris Date's interview? Did you believe in hell?
Oh, of course I believe in hell. Yeah. Um, I don't. I. It's just unconvincing. Like there's. It seems to be a growing trend, to be honest with you, to
Yeah.
believe in annihilationism. I just don't really understand the want or the need to rid that. I think it comes from an improper understanding of hell altogether. We do have like we have certain descriptive, what I guess what could be called descriptive passages about hell in scripture, but we don't have a whole lot about it. We simply know that it's eternal and that it's where you go if you don't want to be with God.
Yeah.
Um, just as C.S. Lewis said, he said that the gates of hell are locked from the inside. And learning from the Orthodox perspective of heaven and hell, not so much as a spatio-temporal place, but more or less the state of being that you're in after you leave this life. It's interesting because I think I've heard you even say before that hell is filled with the love of God. Is that, am I right in
That's the
saying that
fire. Yeah, that's the fire
yeah.
that burns.
And so hearing that before as a Protestant, you don't really understand that.
Mm.
Um, but as an Orthodox Christian, you realize that actually no, that's the classic Christian view, is that it's not about being punished by God, simply that you're not able to be in his presence. And so rather than refining you and glorifying you, it just burns you up and it destroys you essentially. Not in a nihilistic way, but in a way that essentially um, it, just as you're in a constant trajectory towards God from the moment that you say yes to Jesus Christ in this life now, and then continuing on in heaven, it's the same way with the opposite. You know, we can go into a constant trajectory away from God, and hell is no different. So um, it is everlasting. It's just a constant degradation of yourself because you don't want anything to do with God. And so when you think about it in terms of that, it's not just as simple as saying, well, yes, I choose God, but really, if you do choose God, I mean, you're going to follow him. And that's going to lead to salvation. Scripture says as much. Tradition says the same thing. The Church Universal has always said that. And so it is your decision whether or not you want to go there. So I don't really see the need to castigate the person that says that, hell exists and you can go there. Yeah. I just don't see the reason behind that. So
what about purgatory? Because most Orthodox say there's no such thing, or there's no explicit teaching of in Orthodoxy of purgatory, but nothing impure can stand before God. Do you think everyone is purified on earth before their death that ends up in heaven, or do you believe in some sort of purgatory? Is there a form of Orthodox teaching that accomplishes the same thing as purgatory in the Catholic teachings?
Yes. So there's no definitive teaching on purgatory as the Catholic Church would define it in the Catechism. Now we certainly would not say that every soul is automatically purgated on this earth, and then the minute that they are separated from their body, they're with the Lord. We don't really make a claim on what exactly happens afterwards. That's why we still pray for the dead, because we believe that prayer is ultimately timeless. It's outside space and time. So people kind of get confused. They say, oh, well, you're praying for souls. That must mean that you believe in purgatory. And it's more nuanced than that. There is a generalized view of what are called toll houses in Orthodoxy, which essentially is a final testing allowed by God to see if you're ready to enter the kingdom of heaven, but it's not dogmatic. So you're going to find Orthodox that believe in it and some that don't. There have been Orthodox saints that have attested to it, and there have been Orthodox saints that haven't said anything about it at all. So we don't really know. But as far as the one thing that Orthodoxy, I think, would explicitly deny is that there's ongoing suffering after death as a means of purgation. It would essentially just be a test of some other form, but we don't know the exact mechanics of it. If God wants to test somebody, then obviously God, he can do that. So we don't make any definitive pronouncements on it. We don't deny purgatory flat out, but it's just like the Uniates in the Catholic Church. The Eastern Catholics, lots of them don't hold to purgatory. They're allowed to believe in something sort of alternative to it. So
oh, really?
It's yeah. If you look, there's a few doctrines that the are kind of split on. Like, for instance, St. Gregory Palamas, he was condemned by the Catholic Church a number of years ago, but then in the recent future of the Catholic Church, he was uncondemned, as it were, because of his famous debate with Barlaam and the essence energies distinction. And so there were a lot of Eastern Catholics when they first came to the Catholic Church and under the safety of the Roman Pontiff that essentially just threw out tons of Eastern Catholic tradition, but have started to readopt a lot of it. So you do have Eastern Catholics that don't believe in purgatory, that don't believe in absolute divine simplicity, the way that Thomas Aquinas would state it, et cetera, et cetera. It's very complicated, it's very nuanced, and I don't have a great understanding of it, but yeah.
Interesting, very interesting. I'll have to look into that with the Uniate churches that came back. I just want to give a quick shout out to my friend Lord Mozart 308.
Oh, I love that dude.
He's in the live chat now, and my new friend Converse Contender, he's in the live chat. Just want to give a shout out. I don't know if you listened to my interview. He interviewed me on his channel, Converse Contender.
I just listened.
Real sweet guy.
It was great.
Sweet guy.
It's fantastic. Yeah, that was fantastic. He's really open-minded, so it was really cool.
Yeah. So let's dig in a little bit to the divine energies. What are the real distinctions between the Orthodox position and the Catholic position? Because as we said in email, we went back and forth a couple of times, and I said there's that whole Franciscan school which takes a different approach to the divine simplicity and different subtle questions like that. And Blessed John Duns Scotus makes some sort of formal distinction between the reason, the rational part of God, and the volitional part of God. So between free will and reason in God, there's some sort of formal distinction that Scotus makes that Thomas Aquinas was unwilling to make or unable to make for whatever reason. But
Right.
just because you're a saint or a blessed doesn't mean that you're infallible. It doesn't mean that you know everything and that you can unravel all the mysteries of God, certainly. But
Right.
just talk a little bit from your perspective where you think there might be a real difference between Orthodoxy and Catholicism today.
That's really hard to say because I've gotten so many different opinions on it, and it seems like a lot of people like. I mean, there are Catholic dogmatic reference books that you can go to. Like Denzinger is one of the most famous that you
Yeah.
can use to reference Catholic dogma. And to be honest, I'm not as familiar with what they would say on absolute divine simplicity if they take a more Thomistic sort of viewpoint on it. I'd say that the Orthodox understanding of absolute divine simplicity is that there's no distinction between essence and energies. So that might be a misconception on the Orthodox Christian's part. And so I'm trying to like wade through that and figure out, is that actually what Catholic doctrine teaches? If they do teach that dogmatically, that there is no separation between essence and energy, which I would find hard to believe because the Cappadocians taught it. Many of the early church fathers taught the essence energies distinction, and then it culminated in like the 14th century with Gregory Palamas. Um, there has always been this held belief that there is a divine simplicity to God, but whether it's absolute and what absolute actually means is one of those things where it's kind of hard to parse out from a lay perspective, somebody that's just looking into it. So like my understanding of the essence energies distinction would be that we never interact with the essence of God, his simple form. We can only participate in the energies. And the simple dumbed down analogy is essentially that if I were to come in direct contact with the sun, I would burn up and die. I wouldn't actually be able to enjoy it or to communicate with the sun, but I can go outside and feel its rays and the energy of the sun, just as the plants do. They use it to photosynthesize and make oxygen for us. And so we're constantly in contact with the energies of the sun. And so the energies that are permeating off the sun technically are the sun, but it's not the essence of the sun. It's just the energy thereof. And so that's what we would essentially say about God. And so when you start to get into this distinction between essence and energies, it affects pretty much everything about your theology. It affects the hypostatic union of Jesus Christ. It has something to say about whether or not the Holy Spirit spirates from both the Father and the Son, or just the Father,
Yeah.
or the classic filioque difference in between Orthodox and Catholic. It affects your soteriology. So how do you view heaven? How do you view hell? It affects your eschatology. I mean, it literally touches upon everything. So if there's an actual substantial difference between the Catholics and the Orthodox, I've yet to really understand what that is because I get so many different opinions from both Orthodox and Catholics on that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, when I look at these issues, they're so nuanced and subtle. What comes to mind is that sort of distinction between monism and monotheism. Is the infinite distinct from the finite, or is the infinite the source of the finite, and therefore the finite is part and parcel of the infinite? Or I'm putting it in sloppy terms, very sloppy terms. But deification, right. Becoming, heaven is partaking in the life of God and entering into the life of the Trinity. So that subtle distinction. Well, is it by participation, or is there a real entering into that essence and unification in a deeper level? I for one don't have a preference, and whatever is true is good.
Right.
And
yeah.
I mean, I could see dangers on both sides if we lean too far towards pantheism and monism, where every good monotheist ends up being a pantheist because that's all there is God. So in heaven it's pantheism, but here below we're sort of being tested. And if you're a pantheist here below, you don't make it. But if you're a monotheist here below, then you get to enter into monism or pantheism. There's that. Sure. If you lean too far that way, then it would seem, I think, to obliterate our unique identity as individual persons. And if you go too far the other way, where there's, you end up with something like Islam, where the sovereignty of God is just sort of alienating. So the actual truth will be, I think we should expect the unexpected when it comes to God and to heaven and our relationship with God. But there are certain principles in the Catholic Church such that God in his sovereignty, he's perfectly simple, but and when he acts outside of the Godhead, like in creation, when God acts in creation, it's always all three persons of the Trinity that are acting, but we have this attribution that we're able to attribute to each of the three persons. But there's the formal distinctions like this. And when I think about the perfections of God being identical among themselves and in God and with God, all the perfections, all the transcendentals, goodness, truth, beauty, justice, mercy, life itself. When we think about that those infinite perfections, how they're all identical among themselves and identical with God in the Godhead, and then how here below we're able to parse them and treat of them separately. When we talk about justice, we're not necessarily explicitly dealing with issues of health, even though they are connected. And when we're talking about health, we're not necessarily explicitly addressing concerns about beauty, but they are obviously connected. And so all of the perfections here below can be treated piecemeal, but at the same time, they're all united and identical among themselves. But we're not in a position here in this finite world to treat of each infinite perfection as being all of them as being identical among themselves. We're sort of forced by our finite nature to treat them piecemeal. So those are just some of my reflections on this whole question of essence and energies. But it's really beyond me for the most part.
Same, yeah, I would agree.
So are you happy with your Orthodox journey? Have you got a spiritual director that you're continuing with? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I apologize if I'm shaking at all. I'm super cold. It's my basement.
Okay.
My wife and my son are upstairs, and he's about ready to go to sleep. So
you want to grab a sweater?
I don't want to go upstairs and disturb him, so I'm just gonna kind of wing it. I have my space heater right next to me, so yes, I do have a spiritual director, Father Hector. He is the head pastor, whatever you want to call him. There's 3 priests at my church, and the Father Deacon Theodosi was just ordained like 2.5 months ago. So he's like a baby priest, and Father Hector is an archpriest. So he's my father confessor, my spiritual director, the whole 9. But I'm still technically not a catechumen. It's a delicate situation because of my wife. She has no interest in becoming Orthodox. So the ideal way to enter the church would be for my son and for my wife to come with me. But we're slowly starting to see that might not be a possibility. So, yeah.
I sympathize. Obviously, my situation. My wife's anti-Catholic, so that's never going to happen. Or, well, it might happen, but it'll be one of the greatest surprises and one of the greatest miracles that ever happened. On God's green earth. But I think your wife is probably a little bit more amenable, given the fact that she's at least a Christian, an acting Christian.
She still goes to church. Yeah, right. She goes to that Baptist church that I used to go to. I still go with her on Sundays to support her, but I do alternate. Like tomorrow, I'm going to liturgy because I want to. So so there is the compromise on both ends. I'll spend most Saturdays going to Vespers if I know that I can't go to liturgy on Sunday or whatever. So it's usually a good occasion when I get to go to liturgy, which is like once or twice a month. It's also difficult. I have a 10-month-old, so like taking him to church, my wife's church is at 10:45, and that's like right around his nap time. So like if I can't go with her to help take care of the baby because he's going to be fussy and ornery and all that stuff, like she just pretty much opts out of going because to go by herself is really a pain in the butt with our son, and she doesn't get anything out of it anyhow. So I like to go with when I can, so that I can at least encourage her to continue searching and that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Do you mind if I ask a couple of questions about your your move away from Protestantism into Orthodoxy and how it bears on your relationship. Do you mind if I ask you about that?
Yeah, go ahead, man.
Um, you are one flesh because of the sacrament of marriage. You agree?
Yes.
So you should be able to communicate with your wife on a deep level and a very meaningful level about spiritual things. And so it would seem to me that given the fact she's a practicing Christian, you would be able to explain very clearly what opened up for you in your heart and mind that brought you to where you are today. And so is the impediment that it's impossible to communicate, or is it that everyone has to chew on and digest these ideas and come to it on their own, or what's happening? Because it's very frustrating to me that people don't that people take a lot of time to adjust their position, even if they are one flesh with their spouse and they see a beautiful transformation, or maybe she doesn't see it as a beautiful transformation, but I certainly do. But just talk a little bit about that intimacy that you have and why there is still a barrier, and maybe free will is the key there. I don't know, but maybe you could just talk about that.
Yeah, I've talked a lot to my spiritual director about this. What's the best way to communicate what I'm going through with my wife? Because my wife and I are best friends. I spend
Yeah.
all my time with her. We know each other like the back of our hands. We're going to be together until the day we die. So there is an intimacy there, but I think when we're talking about, oh, can you hear me?
I can hear you, but your camera
Okay,
went off there.
that's okay. It's low power mode on my phone. I might have to plug it in soon, but I'm good for right now.
Okay.
But essentially, my wife is she's basically just confused by the whole thing, because she saw me as a Catholic, then she saw me as a Protestant, now she's seeing me as an Orthodox Christian. And so you have to understand, in 7 years, that's a lot of change and transition. And so she's just not. I think she's kind of preparing herself for me to not be Orthodox in a year, if that makes sense. And also, I have a tendency to try and over explain to my wife.
Hmm.
And that doesn't really get us anywhere, because my wife is very unfamiliar with scripture and with theology as a whole. So when I try and converse with her and to explain the position in the area that I'm coming from, to her, it's basically like I'm starting from step 100 instead of step one.
Hmm.
And I don't know how to get back to the basics, if that makes sense. I don't know how to get back to the basics of even what the gospel is, because even my view on what the gospel is has changed a little bit, if
Hmm.
that makes sense. And yeah, so I'm trying more so to communicate my transition into Orthodoxy through my actions as opposed to my words. And hopefully she'll see that and notice, hey, there's something different about Kieran, and I want a part of that.
Is that the advice you got from your spiritual director?
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. Yep,
Actions speak louder than words.
absolutely.
Yeah, but I understand everything you said, and it makes sense. But the kernel of it really is the love and the union that you have uh, to become one. But you're still two. You still have free will. I mean, this is the essential um, the essential point I want to focus on is the fact that you are one. You do love each other in a very intimate way.
Yeah,
There's a deep knowledge, but there's still that free will, and she's able to think her own thoughts, and she has a different set of assumptions, and much of the knowledge that you have is not really communicable because you need a certain basis for that knowledge, and you need a certain context for that knowledge.
sure.
And yeah, so there will always be a little bit of a barrier. This is what I'm getting at, really, is that barrier between husband and wife.
Yeah.
Is it important to you to get to the point where you can be on the same page, because it will increase your intimacy even more spiritually?
Oh, dude, that's what I desire more than anything. Um, that's what I want for my wife and I. But I think behind all of this is something that might even be a little bit more important, which is that even if her and I aren't on the same wavelength spiritually right now, it's the level of respect that her and I can still have for one another in allowing us to go and explore and do our own thing. Um, the level of understanding that my wife has for me as a human being, let alone a human being that changes his mind on things pretty regularly, um, it's astounding the kind of patience that she has. And so it's no different with this. The fact that she says, "Yeah, go do your thing. Go to liturgy, go to vespers, join the church, do what you want to do." I think to me it means a lot, though I do greatly desire to have her there with me. But I think in the Lisney family specifically, all of the men are sort of, I don't want to say cursed. That's not the right word, but we all have this same. I mean, it's the same with my father and my stepmother.
Mhm.
She's not a Catholic. It's the same with my brother and his wife. She's not a Catholic. They're all Christians of some form or another. But there's something about the Lisney men where we are a very strong, and this, I don't want this to sound, like it's,
Boasting.
yeah, like it's boasting or anything like that. But essentially, the Lisney men do have a very strong spiritual sort of side to us, and ironically enough, it comes from the matriarch of the family, my dad's mom. So for some reason, she passed on to all of us men the strong spiritual side that she had, and so that's where all of our hearts lie. That's what we see as the most important, and we tend to attract women that don't necessarily have the same sort of thing. And maybe that's good because otherwise we might be tempted into pre-lust or something like that. But for us, it just seems to be the pattern.
Mm.
And I think that's ultimately what God has called us to. Because sometimes I look at people like couples at church and I'm like, man, I'm envious of that. Like they have their whole family here. The husband and the wife are both receiving communion together with the same sort of reverence. That's really beautiful. But I have an awesome opportunity to really be saved essentially through my wife and through my son, because now I have an extra cross that I have to carry that God has given me. And so I fully believe that God has given me my wife for a reason. And if that's, if this is a part of that, which I'm sure that it is, then I want it exactly how it's supposed to be. I don't want it manipulated so that it can temporarily benefit me or make me feel better or comfort me or whatever.
Mm.
So,
Yeah. What about, I want to ask a sort of peripheral question about your transition into Orthodoxy. Have you encountered a lot of animosity between those, well, maybe on social media or maybe in real life, more likely in social media, but the two camps fighting each other, Orthodox and Catholic? There's some sort of Facebook group that someone invited me to, and I'm on it, and I see some of the back and forth, which is not
mm,
terribly productive. It's a lot of
no,
antagonism, animosity. How much of that are you exposed to, and what's your attitude toward that sort of battle?
it's prevalent everywhere on social media. Now, there are the occasional, it's sort of this thing where it's like, the one Orthodox or the one Catholic that says like, "Hey guys, like, it's probably not the most productive thing for us to be calling each other papists and divided Orthodox and all this kind of stuff and heretic and schismatic and blah 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 blah." The first person that says that gets chastised and essentially is said like, "Oh, you're just a liberal. You're just a liberal thinking person and
Hmm.
you want to compromise on the faith." And so it is everywhere, and it's really easy to be sucked into that sort of mentality. And for me, like, um I the first thing I do when I look at a video is scroll through the comments. Like, I don't know if you do that. i'm
Yeah.
sure a lot of i'm sure a lot of people do that, but dude, I scroll through the comments. I'm like, all right, let's see what trolls are out today. And it's like my immediate response is like, dude, I want to totally just destroy them. But that's been part of my growth right now. Like, I don't know as much as I think I know. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And so like I should probably just shut my mouth.
Hmm.
Um especially if it's at the expense of I want to debate you. Like what has, I mean, has debate really ever in the history of the world changed the opponent's mind? It might have changed like one of the viewers' mind of that particular debate or whatever, but they're generally speaking, polemics, that sort of thing, when you get into that area, it just is like, yeah, I don't know if Christ would have been speaking like this. Like, I don't, even when he rebuked the Pharisees, called them brood of vipers, and you know, essentially just destroyed them and ripped them up one side down the other. It really, it was a different flavor than a Christian who's totally imperfect and not God doing even worse than what Jesus did to the people that were unbelievers. And so, like, I don't know, dude, it's a fine line. Like, it's really hard. Like, yes, the truth matters. Yes, we have to stand for what we believe is the Orthodox faith, both Catholic and the Orthodox and Protestants even. I'll throw them in, even though, I mean, come on, Protestantism. But still, like, everybody is convinced of their own beliefs, and it's we're just trying to figure that out. And we should have a spirit of loving and kindness rather than trying to just rip each other apart. It's really tempting to do that, though.
Yeah, I've evolved into a sort of state of mind where I don't see argumentation as useful in apologetics. I see argumentation as useful for those who are already committed to their worldview. So if I were a good Hindu, I would want to look at all the arguments for Hinduism, and hopefully I would look also at the arguments against Hinduism.
Right.
And I think if you're, I think God loves the Hindus, and Christ died for the Hindus, and every Hindu that goes to heaven is saved by Jesus Christ, right? And there's no other name under heaven that can save. So I'm not worried about the Hindu, but I want them to dig into their faith and to find arguments for and against their faith. And it's sort of an in-house project. Same thing with the Protestant. I like to ask questions about authority, obviously, as you know, and about the canon of scripture and these sorts of things. But making arguments, I don't find that useful in apologetics, where you're trying to change someone's position. But just having questions or conditional statements, like if this, then the implications are that, and if the other, then there might be implications this way. And food for thought, rather than making an argument. And one of the reasons I think argumentation is not very productive in apologetics when it comes to changing someone's mind to change camps, is that you won't have converted them from their worldview to your worldview. You will have converted them from their worldview to some human reasoning. I think St. Paul said something about this in perhaps in the book of Acts or one of his epistles, but something about the human reasoning can't save you, and only Jesus Christ can save you, and it's the power of God. And argumentation, for that reason, I see argumentation as good for you when it comes to testing your faith, questioning your faith, and not only that, but bolstering your faith and building up confidence in the faith. If I meet someone with a different worldview, and they're very, very confident of their worldview, and they're not interested in converting me, and they're not, asking me to convert them, then I'm very happy to just admire the confidence that they have, to the extent that it's rational and self-consistent, and to explore the common ground. And it's a different mindset altogether from that sort of polemic mindset. And so my attitude has changed a little bit over the past couple of years doing these podcasts and being exposed to so many different people with different worldviews.
Yeah, I can imagine, because it's not like, especially in your position and the opportunities that you get to speak with other people, it's not like you run into a Hindu every day, or
no.
What was that lady that you recently had on? She was a Universalist, and
near-death experiences.
Yeah. It's like, whoa. I mean, I guess maybe without knowing it, you do run into people like that. But that was wild, dude. That was really wild. And the whole time I was like, ugh. Like, was like, I want David to totally own her. And some of the things that you said were, I was like, oh yeah, okay, you're making some good points there. But like, it's funny how immediately the first thought is, oh, I just want this person to be dismantled, basically. And it's like, wow, that's really not a good attitude to have. Like, I had a conversation yesterday with one of my Protestant buddies, and he was like, well, he was just asking me like, okay, so like, what is it that you believe now as an Orthodox, and et cetera, et cetera. And we started talking, and he was like, well, okay, so what about this? What about once saved, always saved? He's a big proponent of eternal security. And I was like, yeah, I don't believe it. And I took him to the passages in scripture where it clearly shows that we don't have eternal security just by once at one point in time believing in Jesus. And we kept going back and forth. And by the end of it, I was like, dude, like, you're the one that said you believed in sola scriptura, and I'm showing you these passages in context, and you're not listening. Like, you're using your feelings to try and argue your point. And by the end of it, it was like, we didn't come to any agreement. Like, I didn't make him see my side of it. He was just obstinately in this position of like, yeah, I'm going to stick with my position no matter what. And I kind of had to be like, okay, yeah, like, that just is what it is. Like, it's only the power of God that's going to change somebody's mind in a lot of cases. And that can be, God can use it through debate. He can use it through conversation. He can use it through simple dialogue. He can use it through books, through the internet, through, I mean, for me, for leaving Protestantism, it was this podcast, you know? He used you to change my mind on a lot of things. And so it's just a matter of as to whether or not we're going to be honest with ourselves and say, yeah, maybe I should reevaluate some of the positions that I'm holding to. Because the first thing that we're tempted to is pride. And we have this idea that, like, well, at least I do. I know that Preles gets to me a lot where it's like, oh, I'm worlds above everybody else as far as spirituality goes. And it's like, Kieran, the fact that you just thought that thought completely self-refutes. It just totally refutes everything you just said. And it's like, yeah, that's true. I'm actually nothing, like, legitimately nothing. There's nothing, there's basically nothing that I have to offer to anybody else. So why I think like, oh, you know, I have all of these answers, it's just ridiculous. Like, the position that I'm starting to understand that I need to take is one of humility, but my flesh doesn't want to let me do that in a lot of ways, because I want to try and think my way out of things. I want to try and, pride my way out of things. It's definitely difficult, like, trying to work past all of that and to admit, like, yeah, I'm not as great as I actually think I am, and I could be wrong about a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I think another idea to bear in mind when you're talking with people who have opposing views, and especially those who want to force their opposing views down your throat or to prove a point with you. The approach that I like to take is one of prayerfulness, where you're just looking at the salvation history, that you're here and now, and that this person, Christ died for them, and they're on a journey, they're on a faith journey with a lot of twists and turns, and they're going to end up ultimately in heaven or in hell. And so any time that you spend focusing on this human being is a time of prayer for their eternal salvation, and of course for your own eternal salvation. Like, they are a means of sanctification for you, and you are a means of sanctification for them, especially if you're praying for them, praying for their eternal salvation and not judging the heart. I mean, if someone says, Kieran, I'm a young person and all my friends are doing sex orgies with lots of nasty drugs and making snuff films, and it seems like a lot of fun, should I join in? I want you to say, no, don't join in. But we need to have some sort of discretion when it comes to guiding people. We have to correct people when they're going astray in a way that is obviously dangerous for them, and if we have some sort of relationship with them where we're able to correct them or to guide them, that's a necessary component of your interaction with them. But for the most part, if you're an adult talking with another adult, I think the emphasis really should be prayer and their eternal salvation, your eternal salvation, and how this particular moment right now is playing out in front of all the angels and saints in heaven that are watching, and it's going to be played back, right? At the general judgment, everyone's going to see what your intentions were, what your were you being manipulative? Were you being vain? Were you being self-seeking? Everyone's going to see everything. So you may as well get in the habit every moment, in every interaction, get in the habit of making it a good interaction. And a good interaction is a prayerful interaction, which is focused on the eternal salvation of yourself and the people that you're interacting with. So what do you think of that idea?
Oh, dude, I mean, that's the ideal. It's definitely easier said than done. And I think that any Christian that's seeking after God and truly takes their faith seriously would still admit that all of that sounds really nice and it can be wrapped up in a pretty little bow, but it's so hard to, like, when you're in the moment, dude.
Yeah.
Like, you know how many times I have to catch myself and I'm like, okay, dude, bite your tongue. Like, stop, man. Like, just stop. Yeah. And that's one thing that I've loved about my journey into Orthodoxy is, like, I mean, I've always sort of done and held to an examination of conscience, but I mean, like, I don't know if have you ever tried just, like, as you go throughout your day, writing down sins of omission, sins of thought, sins of word, sins of deed, as you go throughout your day. I did this for like a few days in a row, and like usually by the afternoon, it was like, this is countless. Like I can't even look at this, but it's like, I'm so acutely aware that I'm sinning anymore. And it's things that, like, you know, all the big stuff. I mean, I come from a history of drug abuse and alcohol addiction. And so my past is really shoddy. Like, it's not the best. And I think about, like, you know, God delivered me from these huge sins in my life. And now that I'm pursuing him, it's kind of like when you're a kid and, you know, like, I don't know about you, but like when I was 5 years old, spilling a cup of juice was like the equivalent of not being able to pay my mortgage today. It was like just astronomically huge. Like, oh my gosh, dude, I'm going to get in trouble. This is the most serious thing that's ever happened to me. I'm literally going to die if I don't fix this. I don't want my mom to see this. And sin is kind of the same thing, where it's like looking at it and trying to balance, like, God is completely merciful. But it's a good thing that now I'm starting to see some of these sins I didn't care about before, like whether it's talking, you know, behind somebody's back, so gossip, or whether it's losing my temper in small things, if it's losing my patience, or maybe thinking a thought that is less than admirable from a Christian standpoint. It's like, before, these things wouldn't have really bothered me, but now it's like, yeah, I need to start working on these things because they are serious. Like, these are actual things. And it all centers around pride. I mean, a lot of it does. And so interactions with people, my biggest temptation is to be right, is to be correct. And so making that into a prayerful dialogue is something that, in retrospect, you know, looking back to a conversation, I can sort of say, like, yeah, I hope some good came from that. God, please use that for good. But in the moment, it's sort of like, yeah, but you're wrong. So, like, here's why you're wrong. And so it's an ideal, and treating conversation that way, I think, is, you know, especially adult to adult, having that prayerful sort of dialogue. It's something that's really important. But I think, as most Christians would admit, unless you're a saint, it's easier said than done, for sure.
For sure. So what else do you want to touch on before I let you go? Because I do have another interview I need to prepare for. Is there any other topic that's been burning on your mind with respect to Orthodoxy or Catholicism, or differences that still exist between you and your brother and your father in terms of theology that you think are important?
To be honest, I mean, I don't really think so. You kind of covered a broad spectrum of things. I'm sure stuff will pop up later on in the future I can email you about. But yeah, I mean, the one thing that I will say is that there's been some interaction between myself and that Lord Mozart character, whatever his real name is. Really nice guy.
Yeah.
I wanted to formally extend the offer to him. We are, and me and Aiden have spoken to you about this before. For people that are listening that don't know, Aiden's my brother, um, and we're doing the novenas. Like we've just been doing that continuously for a few months now, and then just picking an intention after 9 days. And a lot of people think like, oh, like they're praying a full, 5 decades a day of the rosary, but we're not. We're just doing one Hail Mary and prayer to Saint Joseph, terror of demons. And so the next round is going to be for Lord Mozart, for his transition into Catholicism and finding the truth, and et cetera, et cetera.
Nice.
But I did extend the invitation that if he wants to get in on that action, that he should definitely do that, because dude, it's already, my mom, I think I told you maybe the last time we spoke, I don't know, but when it was sort of off the record, that we were praying for my mom, and she contacted me and was like, hey, I want to go to church with you. And she literally hasn't thought about church in years and years and
Wow.
years. And I'm fully convinced that it's definitely Theotokos, definitely the Theotokos, but I think that Saint Joseph is really just like working on some generational and family tree demons in the Lisney family. We have a laundry list of the same kinds of sins throughout the Lisney history.
Yeah.
And I think he's starting to work on those and break down barriers and stuff. And it was just amazing that my mom called and wanted to come up to my church, and she did that, and she said, cool, I'm going to come back, which
Nice.
I was really surprised at, dude.
Wow.
So like, yeah, I mean, it's really powerful. So I think that we all need to get behind prayer, but it'd be really cool if we could get like a whole group of men, women, whoever, people that are interested on having an active prayer life. I don't know. I know how hard it is from experience to establish a prayer rule, but once you get your prayer rule going, once you have your daily, your daily practice, the main thing is to keep it as consistent as possible.
Yeah.
So if you're going to set aside your time in the morning, whether that's 20 minutes, whether that's 15 minutes, maybe 10 minutes at night, just make sure that you don't miss it no matter what.
Yeah.
And the consistency is what counts. And finding that more and more, like if I miss, one session of prayer, whatever it might be, it's like you can definitely feel the difference.
Yeah.
And so anybody listening that is interested in getting in on that action and maybe needs some guidance in that area, get a spiritual father, and they can help you better than I could. But at the same time, there is stuff that you can do from a lay perspective that if we unite in prayer, it really, really helps. Especially too, the last thing I'll say is that we might have these doctrinal differences or whatever. My brother and I are a perfect attestation to that fact that he's Catholic, I'm Orthodox, but we do commune together in prayer. And that keeps the true spirit of ecumenism alive, as opposed to this false. We don't deny that we have differences. We don't deny that we belong to separate canonical churches. That's not the point. The point is that we still want to commune together in some way, and this is the way that we're told to do that. So that's amazing. The last thing I would say.
Amazing. Well, the last thing you're going to say is you're going to talk a little bit about your own podcast you've got in the works with your brother. So yeah, just talk us through what we can expect, when we can expect it, and what sort of content you're going to have, and how you and your brother are going to play different roles, or are you going to play the same role in the podcast? Just talk a little bit about it, please.
Well, Aiden's gonna play the role of comic relief, and I'm gonna play the role of
of the genius.
Yeah, no, Aiden's not. Nah, just kidding, Aiden. I love you, bud. No, we are doing a podcast. It's going to be called Ascending the Ladder from East and West, and essentially, it's playing off what I was just speaking about, communion together between the Orthodox and Catholicism. But more than that, I think spanning Christian traditions, and we're going to emphasize the importance of extra biblical reading, because a lot of Protestants don't like extra biblical reading, but as Catholics and Orthodox absolutely love it, and it's important and it's good. I know that you're venturing into the Philokalia.
Yep.
I started reading that a little bit, but I'm sticking with St. Athanasius on the Incarnation, reading Ladder of Divine Ascent by by St. John Climacus. And so the idea is we're going to pick, it's going to be kind of like a study group. We're going to pick one book, one spiritual book by a father of the church. And we're going to go through it semi-meticulously. And we'll pick a new book for each series in the podcast as a whole. So the first series that we're going to be doing is on St. John Climacus's Ladder of Divine Ascent. And we're going to go, it has 30 steps in it. So what could be the equivalent to 30 chapters. All in all, releasing a podcast, I think we agreed on a bi-weekly basis right now, would take about 8 months. And the first podcast is going to be, we did a couple trial runs, like I was telling you before we went live, and got some good takes, but we're going to re-record the intro episode. Aiden's finishing up some schooling, and then he's going to start reading the Ladder of Divine Ascent. So as he's reading it, we plan to start going through it. And so we'll have the first introductory episode recorded by this weekend, and I hope within the next 2 weeks or so, once I get the RSS feed going and all that squared away, everything edited, I would hope within the next 2 weeks or so, we would have the first episode posted. But I also don't want to post an episode and wait another month or so until Aiden can start reading the book before we release it. So that'll all be hammered away, but I'll keep y'all fresh on the updates. Know what I'm saying?
Yeah, we'll put a link in the description once you have the link, and we'll definitely. I mean, we'll definitely be looking forward to that, and I look forward to it. I'm going to read that book too. I bought the book because of you, the Ladder of Ascent. And which century did he write that book?
So St. John Climacus was, I believe, in the 5th century. He was around the same time as St. John. I have it right here. I believe he was the 5th or 4th century. Yeah. Very, very early on. But basically, St. John Climacus was essentially a hermit living in the caves in the desert. And so after years and years and years of solitude and extreme asceticism, people started catching wind about him. And so he was commissioned by, I don't know if it was a metropolitan from his area. I think Metropolitan Filaret. I think that he commissioned that that St. John would write this as like an instruction manual for ascetics, and so he took it upon himself to write that. And so the details of that could be fuzzy. It's been a little while since I've read the introduction and all that kind of stuff, but basically, he's a really revered father of the church. He's looked at sort of along the lines of St. Anthony the Great, who's kind of like the pioneer of desert monasticism and monasticism as a whole, because this all kind of corresponds with the Edict of Milan and the legalization of Christianity. And of course, with that, the end of martyrdom. And so people were looking for a way to continue on because they were seeing that Christianity was becoming this super nominal thing. And so St. John Climacus, St. Anthony, St. Moses the Black, all these guys are pioneers of the ascetic life and where we get all different forms of monasticism from. And so this book is kind of similar to The Imitation of Christ. For the Catholic layperson that knows what that is, which is also fantastic. It's kind of like that, only it's much earlier, and it's different, but yeah.
I'm reading Saint Maximus the Confessor. Is that how you say his name?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
He's a little bit of a departure from the other writings in the Philokalia so far. He's going more philosophical, more into depth about theology. And which century did he live? Do you know?
He was, I think, in the 8th or the 9th century. He had a participation, I believe, in the 7th Ecumenical Council. if I'm not mistaken, now don't anybody quote me on that because I'm not a church historian, but if I remember correctly, it's 8th or 9th century that Maximus the Confessor lived. So because if I'm not mistaken, he actually is venerated in the West. And so if that's the case, it's a great indication that it was pre-schism.
Yeah.
But off the top of my head, I'm pretty sure it's 8 or 9th. If I'm mistaken on that, I'll write it in the comments or whatever. But yeah, some of the writers of the Philokalia, it's really hard to like, for instance, like Saint Isaac the Syrian. Like they don't know if all of the writings that are in the Philokalia are actually attributable to him, but that whoever wrote it, essentially they say, like, tradition says that it is attributed to him, but they can't definitively say, and so they look at the writing, they say, yeah, but this is Orthodox writing, so like whoever wrote it has a lot of clout and can we can put this in the Philokalia. This has obviously been handed down, so some of the stuff, it's conjecture or whatever, like that this person wrote this or whatever, but it's all, regardless, it's all fantastic. So
Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
I'm very inspired by it, and it's on my list of things to do to get some sort of control over all of my appetites. I'm excited about it, but it's a daunting prospect, right?
No, dude, I know, man. I know. Yeah.
So this is about you, but I wanted to get your feedback on our friend Matthew Murdoch. What do you think is happening? How's his voyage going? Don't say too much because we're live, we can't edit, but he's a dear friend, and he's still a Christian, but he's exploring a lot of avenues, pertaining to annihilationism, and has some doubts about some pretty fundamental doctrines of Christianity, such as the Trinity. Even that's being called into doubt somewhat. He's open to the idea that God's not a Trinity. So what are your impressions of his journey? It's been a long and very long and complicated journey for our dear friend. What do you think? Where do you think he's at today?
Well, I just spoke with him last Sunday. My son and I were on the way to the grocery store. I was like, dude, I got to call that man and talk to him, because I watched his live stream the day before, and I was kind of bummed out because I came in on the portion where he was speaking about the Trinity, and you guys were talking about the essentialism of specific doctrine, like what constitutes a quote unquote saved person, if you want to use the term saved, which I don't. I'm just kidding. But Matthew is like such a good dude. I love Matt, and he's so genuine, and he just wants to know what's true, just like we all do. But it's weird because he was on such a spiritual high from his retreat, and it was really cool to hear him like that, like calling him while I was on a job site and talking to him the one day, and I was like, dude, it sounds like a totally different person. And so to see, like, kind of coming back and then questioning things, like, it's okay to question, but I just want Matt to get out of his head for a little bit. He has the Kieran syndrome, He has this syndrome where it's like, I need the answers and I need them now. And if I can't get them, then all is lost, and I'm just going to basically dig myself into a hole and die. And it's like, dude, it's not like that. Like, it's difficult. It's really difficult. I do worry about some of the positions that he could potentially wander off into, especially when it comes to annihilationism, or obviously more importantly, the Trinity. The Trinity is the basis of the faith. I mean, I think the one thing that I would say to Matthew, if he's listening, which at some point I know he's going to be because he's a CVS junkie, is that, dude, if the Trinity is not in the same way that it's already stated true, 3 persons, 1 being, and God is love, as St. John says. I mean, love is not just like, it's not just a flat attribute of somebody. There has to be an object of that love in order for it to be true.
And so if you're being tempted into some sort of modalism or some form of Arianism or whatever the case might be, who was it that God loved before the foundations of the world? And I think that a lot of people don't think about that. Maybe that's not as strong as a point as I think that it is, but to be honest, like it is kind of a strong point. Did God just love the one person in the one being, or did he love the others in the triune Godhead? Did he love the Holy Spirit? Did he love Christ the Son from all eternity to eternity? And like that's a question that's not really ever answered by people that don't believe in the Trinity, because there's not really a good answer for it. If God just loved himself in the way that you or I love ourselves, well, that there's not really a whole lot to that. Like that's kind of easy to do. But loving the other persons of the Holy Trinity is something that I think has immense significance. And if God is love, then an object of his love has to be there. And I posit that it's the three persons of the Trinity. And so and he was just not even 2 months ago with that other Protestant fellow that you had on, that like celebrating Jewish holidays and all that kind of stuff. Forget his name.
Jeremy
Really nice
Best.
guy.
Jeremy
Yeah.
Best.
Yeah, I mean he's a modalist, though he doesn't like to admit it. His position is modalism, and it's been condemned for 1500 years. And so Matthew at that point was like, man, that's really sad that he would go into modalism. So it's just kind of like, oh gosh, that sucks, because now Matthew's kind of in the same boat. And breaks my heart, but you know.
Yeah, I'm a little bit disappointed too, but you have to, it's like having a child. You have to let the child play and break his, scratch his knee and all that. I've never had a child that I know of, so I can't really relate to parenting, but when you love someone, you want them to be okay. And the feeling that I get as a Christian is that I have a loving Father in heaven. I have a loving mother, the mother of God, Mary.
Yeah.
I have my mother, the church. I have my brothers and sisters, the saints. And there's zero anxiety about doctrine with me. If I don't know the answer, I have zero anxiety. I think to myself, well, my loving mother has the answer. I don't need to worry about it. If I want to look it up, I know where to look up the answers. What does Mother Church teach? What has she always taught? And what sort of weight does that particular teaching have? If it has a lot of weight, then I give it a lot of weight. If it doesn't have a lot of weight, I don't need to give it a lot of weight. And so it's there's no anxiety for me to know everything about Catholicism. I never said to myself, if I'm going to be a Catholic, I have to know and understand and memorize every answer to every question. I just thought, I have a Father in heaven. I have a mother. I have brothers and sisters, and I'm within the safety of the ark, and I'm on my way to heaven. I'm a fallible sinner, and my energy should go into saying yes to grace and no to sin. That's where I focus all my energy. It's not about doctrine for me. It really isn't. And people might be surprised to hear me say that, because I spend a lot of time talking about doctrine. And when I talk to non-Catholics, I tend to, sort of contrast their doctrine with my doctrine. But it's only with a view to getting them into the safety of the ark, so they can relax, kick their feet up on the table like I am, and enjoy being loved by God the Father, having the comfort of Mother Church, having the comfort of all the saints and all the beautiful writings and teachings. But it's really not about doctrine for me. But with Matthew, I feel like he's obsessed with the doctrine.
And last thing I'll say about it, and Matthew, I hope you don't feel like I'm picking on you or like whatever. I know you're such a good sport, and I love you, and I wish you lived close to me so that we could hang out, because we'd probably be metalheads and play like super crazy music together and talk about God all day, which would be awesome. But like, I just want you to think about not only what David just said as far as not getting so hung up on the minutia of theological points and doctrine and all that kind of stuff, and just sort of giving it up to the heavenly host and to God. but just take the understanding that the East has of what it means to be a true theologian. There have been absolute morons, according to the world's definition of what it is to be intelligent, that are considered true theologians of the Orthodox Church. Because to be a theologian, it's not just what you definitionally know about God, but it is what you know God to be. It is how you know God. It is what you experience from God. And so there is, unfortunately, a level of subjectivism with it from, I guess, a purely philosophical standpoint. But dude, it's either, I mean, you have to admit, like, there's a form of cyclical thinking and reasoning to every worldview. And so if you get hung up on the fact that these sorts of problems are cyclical in nature, you're just going to drive yourself mad, because of course they are. But every single worldview is cyclical. You cannot eventually you have to appeal to authority that's not something that you can comprehend with your five senses. Like it just doesn't work like that. You can't name one single person that can prove anything from their worldview that's not cyclical in reasoning or thought. And so we don't need to be ashamed as Christians to say that, yes, we do unfortunately have to admit a level of, that sounds kind of contradictory. Not that we unfortunately have to admit, but we do have to admit that we do have a level of cyclical thinking that we have to appeal to in order to believe the things that we believe. But guess what? So does the person believing in scientism. So does the atheist. So does the Buddhist. So does the Hindu. So does the nihilist. So does the materialist. I mean, it on and on and on and on and on. So need to get into prayer, like just as we all need to get into prayer. And when I was talking earlier about prayer rule and really just placing yourself under the mantle of the Mother of God, that's what has to be done. And if you're not comfortable with doing that with the Theotokos, then just do it with Christ. Just as Saint Paisios said, he's a great saint of the Orthodox Church. He was a monk on Mount Athos, and he died in 94. And he was recently canonized, I think back in 2015 or something like that. And when he was a little boy, and he was aspiring to become a monk, and one of his brothers, who was envious of him because he was sort of like the golden child, got one of his friends who believed in Darwinian evolution to convince him that Darwinism is true. And this greatly disturbed this 11-year-old saint. And so he ran off into the woods into his favorite spot to pray. And so he prayed and prayed for hours upon hours, prostrating himself before God and saying, please, if this is true, if Darwinian evolution is true, like, give me a sign. If you are actually the Son of God, Jesus, please give me a sign. And for hours and hours, nothing happened. And so he fell down exhausted, and he finally said to himself, even if you are only a man, even if you aren't actually God in the flesh, I still am going to follow you. I still am going to give my life to you, because you are a remarkable man. And from that minute that he gave that up, Christ appeared to him and let him know that he was actually who he said he was, that he was God in the flesh. And from then on out, from that crisis of faith, this very saintly man, he went on to do the most miraculous things in the Orthodox Church. And so many miracles and blessings came from this man. And this was a man that even he, as a devout Christian at such a young age, had questions and was really perplexed by this existential crisis. And when he gave it up to God, his prayers were answered. And I feel like, Matthew, you had a taste of that when you went on your retreat. And then you sort of got bogged down again. I think you maybe jumped back into the minutia of theology and what's true and what's not true, maybe a little bit too soon. I could be wrong about all of that, but that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, well, it's good advice. What comes to mind, obviously, for me always with religion is romance and marriage, and we don't. I could not answer many questions about the quantitative aspects of my wife, her exact height, her exact weight, how many hairs on her head, and the dimensions of her different organs and stuff like that. But I'm not that interested. I'd rather just sit next to her, look at her beautiful face, look into her eyes, and serve her. You know, like, I mean, I know what pleases her. I know what doesn't please her. I know what foods she likes. I know what foods she doesn't like. I know what temperature she wants the room to be at. I know how she wants things arranged so that she's comfortable and so she's happy. I know how to please this woman because that's what I care about. I don't know a lot of scientific facts about her because I don't care about those. I want to know. I want to know her and love her and serve her in a way that is relational, and in a way that is romantic, and in a way that is a mutual self-giving. And so it's the same thing with God. God's not going to be impressed if you have memorized a bunch of technical theological factoids, and many of those will be wrong anyway. When we have to expect the unexpected with God, just like I have to expect the unexpected with my wife. That's part of the charm of a human being. That's why these people that want to marry their lifelike sex dolls, and there are people that are doing that, by the way. Yeah, they have these life-size sex dolls, and they're performing these marriages. They're completely missing the point, and I wouldn't want to go so far as to say that that's what Matthew is doing with Jesus Christ and religion, but that's a little bit too far. But the point I'm making here is about personhood, relationship, self-giving, love, service, and pleasing the other. And you know what Jesus said, right? If you love me, keep the commandments. So it comes back to a self-examination and about virtue and curbing our self-love, curbing our appetites, and that's the hard work that I'm procrastinating. It's like, yeah, it's exciting, but I'm not ready to really roll up my sleeves and work on myself yet. I'd rather just play and have discussions with people and be at the outskirts of all the hard work of asceticism. And you know, true Christianity is painful, and it's self-denial, and we cannot have we cannot be Christians without self-denial. So let's just help each other and build each other up and grow in love and in service of God, right?
Right. Also, Robert White, you my boy, son. I love you, dog. Yo, we're cool, homie. It's all good. Be happy. Things are gonna be okay, bro. I promise. Everything is gonna be all right. And that's all I had to say, Robert. Love you, bro.
Do you actually take the time to read each and every one of his comments, or no?
No, I skim through. I usually read like the one that has the most likes on it or the most dislikes, and it's hard to tell because you love every comment that comes through your thread. So I'm like, oh, if David loved this, I used to think like, oh, if David loved this one, it must be super hilarious. But then I'm like, wait a minute. I'm like, Robert posted the same comment 3 or 4 times already. Why did David love that comment? He essentially just regurgitated the same thing.
It's just prayer. It's just every time I heart, it's a prayer. And, I don't indiscriminately heart every comment on my channel. I indiscriminately heart every comment from people that I know. So I know Robert White. I know who he is. I have a mental image of him in my mind. And, he's one of the characters. You're one of the characters. We've never sat down and had a beer together, but you're someone I know and I love. And so I heart all your comments. You could convert to Satanism tomorrow and come back and start trashing my channel. I'd still give you a heart because I know you, right? And it's the same thing with Robert White. And so, like, if someone new comes on my channel and comments, I don't generally give them a heart yet, even though I'm still praying for them. But it's only when I kind of recognize that this is a character that I've seen before, I get to know them, and then I give them a heart. It's the same thing I do on social media, on Facebook. Like, I heart every single comment on anything I post because I know every single person that comments on my posts. So it's just prayer. It's that idea of prayer that it's like lighting a candle for them. Really, that's how I see it.
Heard that.
So thank you so much for being with me. Say hi to your brother, your father, and everyone, and your mother, and invite them one and all to come one by one on my live stream. It'd be nice to talk to your brother again. I know he's busy with school. But give my love to the family, your wife, and everyone. And we'll definitely talk soon. Okay, Kieran?
David, don't tell me how to live my life, okay? I am a free human being.
That was a lot of demands coming from you just now. Nah, I'm just kidding. I'll do all that stuff, man. And likewise to you and yours, bro.
Will do. Take care of yourself, and we'll talk very soon, okay?
All right. Love you, bro.
God bless. Love you. Bye.
All right. Bye.